If you're limited on space, time, or your budget, you may be considering other budget-friendly options to use with growing your own food. And so you might be considering growing food in buckets. What about potatoes? Potatoes are very easy to grow in the garden or a raised bed, but if you don't have the space or you're wanting to have a minimal upkeep, let's see what it's like to grow potatoes in a bucket. Today we're going to talk about the soil blend that you want to use for the potatoes, how to plant them, how to prep the bucket, and then we're also going to be planting them in a grow bag just to compare the growth throughout the season. We're going to start out with a food grade 5-gallon bucket. This one came from Tractor Supply, was only a few bucks there. I like that it's a light color with the white because potatoes don't love the heat. So this will help hopefully reflect some of the heat that we get in the hot summer in my climate. But the first thing we want to do before we start filling the bucket with soil is we want to make sure we have plenty of drainage. No plant likes to have their roots waterlogged. So I'm going to take a drill here and just poke some holes in the bottom of this bucket. Okay, so we've got plenty of drainage holes here, and now we're going to fill the bucket. For containers, you definitely don't want to have a real heavy medium in your container, no matter what it is. So I'm going to do a blend of potting mix. This is Pro Mix that doesn't have any kind of added fertilizer, but it's very light and fluffy. And I'm also going to add some compost. I've found, especially with vegetables in containers, it helps to have a little bit of compost. Even though compost tends to be a little bit more heavy, the blend will help add nutrition for the life of the plant. So I'm just adding all that together. And then to give it just a little bit of extra fertility, I'm also going to add in some organic garden tone. The nutrition analysis on this is a 3-4-4, which is going to be good for potatoes. You can also add in worm castings or anything like that. I like the garden tone because it's a slow release fertilizer and it'll help throughout the course of the season. So once I mix that in, I'm just going to start filling my bucket. I'm not going to fill it all the way, because once the potato starts growing, I'll add more soil as it grows. Okay, by comparison, I have this grow bag here, and these are both actually 5-gallon containers. This is a 5-gallon grow bag. This is a 5-gallon bucket. And I'm not entirely sure why this one's so much taller unless the 5 gallons are measured to here, which could totally be it. But when you're growing in a bucket, you've got to consider too that any kind of soil that's lower than this will potentially provide shade. And potatoes don't like shade. They like to have full sun. And so I'll probably actually end up filling this a little bit more than I fill this. But both of them are going to have the same soil mix. What I love about growing in grow bags is that the roots are not going to circle the container. They do what's called air pruning. Once the roots get to the side, they'll notice that this is a different type of material and they'll stop growing out, and then they'll produce more roots inside. That's why I love growing in grow bags. So if you have those, it's a great option. But if you've got buckets lying around, we're going to see how they actually compare when it comes to the final harvest. Next comes the actual planting of the potatoes. For these containers, I'm going to be growing Yukon Gold. Number one, they've been the most reliable for me in my garden. And number two, they're fairly early maturing, which is something that you might want to consider if you're growing in containers. As I mentioned, potatoes do not love the heat. And so what will happen is if you're growing a really long maturing variety, they may end up getting too hot and will suffer, especially if you live in a climate where it gets really hot in the summer. With containers, it could always be a problem in the summer that they're going to heat up more than the equivalent that you're growing in a raised bed or in a garden. And so that's why an early maturing variety will probably give you a better chance of success in growing potatoes. I went back and forth at whether to plant 1 seed potato or 2 in each of these grow bags. Because a couple of these are kind of small, I think I'm going to go ahead and plant 2. But the problem with planting too many in a grow bag is that you could have them compete and you may not get as big of a harvest. So basically we just take the potato and put it where the little eye is up like that. You can see both of those. And we're gonna do the same thing for this side. And from there, I wanna add about 2 inches probably of soil on top, give or take. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then once they start sprouting, which sprouting can take a couple of weeks, so be patient, but once they start sprouting and they start growing, then you can add more soil. Just don't ever cover the green part too much. Make sure there's green parts that can see the sun. But that's pretty much it as far as planting these potatoes. You can go ahead and water them down and make sure they're moist, but potatoes don't need to be waterlogged. So make sure before you do water them that you stick your finger in the soil, and if it goes knuckle deep and you can still feel the moisture, then they're good. But if they're dry, you definitely need to keep them watered. You know what, while we're at it, let's just throw in another test for fun. In these 2 containers, both the bucket and the grow bag, I planted certified disease-free seed potatoes that I purchased from my local feed store. But a lot of people ask me if they can plant potatoes that have started sprouting in their pantry, the ones that they got from the grocery store. And so I'm gonna try this and see if it makes a difference. These are organic gold potatoes that I got from my grocery store. You can see it's already sprouting. The reason I don't have a problem planting this in a grow bag is because it really doesn't matter if it has some kind of a disease in it that would taint my soil. Obviously we're in containers, I could throw it out. I wouldn't plant this in my raised bed or my ground because once you introduce a disease in your soil, it's not good. So I'm going to be planting this in this grow bag just to compare it. We're gonna compare it to these 2 and see how the grocery store potato compares. The difference is I'm just planting one, but you can see all of those sprouts here, and I'm going to plant them in the same manner as I did the others. The great thing about this test is that the same day that I'm planting these potatoes in the containers, I also planted in my raised beds, and I'm going to be planting in my ground bed as well. So subscribe to the channel and I'll keep you updated on the progress throughout the season so you can see how it worked to plant a potato in a bucket compared to grow bags, compared to raised beds, compared to in the ground.